Hello everyone, I am the Professor Z, and I am back yet again today for another Overlord Season 4 episode review. And returning with me, thanks to all of your kind words in the comments, are the cut content rants. So I hope you're all ready, because with one episode covering almost 100 pages of the light novel, you better believe a fair bit hit the chopping block. Now let's dive right into Overlord Season 4, Episode 7. So we start off this episode within the Dwarven royal capital, as the Quag clan leader, Pei Ryoro, is informed of his army's failure to conquer the dwarves. Pei asks Yozo if they had been followed, but since the bridge had been destroyed, he believed that the dwarves wouldn't be capable of counterattacking for the time being. They then discuss the golems. Now, in the light novel, besides the question as to if Pei could beat them or not, they also considered the fact that there might be more of these golems, and decide to ask the dragons for more information on them. However, as it happens in the anime, this train of thought is interrupted as a messenger enters to inform them of the incoming invaders. With this, the conversation goes from asking for information to asking for the dragons to directly confront the invading dwarfs. Now, I feel like this is heavily underplayed in the anime, but the Quag-dragon relationship isn't so much a master-servant relationship as it is a master-slave. The Quag are allowed to live pretty much because the dragons use them as a sort of workforce. You could imagine that the Quag aren't fans of this arrangement, and it's why Pei wants a fight to weaken both parties. The following interaction between the Quag and the Frost Dragons has a very different atmosphere in the light novel than it does in the anime. In the light novel, you can tell that the Quag are in a constant state of fear while the dragons treat them like utter trash. At one point, the Dragon Lord, I'll be calling him Dragon Lord because I refuse to pronounce this, at one point, Dragon Lord even looks at the treasury and considers replacing the Quag with the dwarfs in order to obtain its contents. The Quag then present a sack of treasure, since all dragons love treasure, and they request for the Dragon Lord's help with the invading force. In the light novel, DL initially acts like the dwarfs are nothing to worry about, but reconsiders when the Quags say that the dwarfs plan to destroy the city. Now, the reason DL took the Dwarven capital in the first place is because he's using it as a base for his eventual draconic empire. He can't just use the rest of the mountain range due to the dragon's greatest enemy, the Frost Giants. Despite what you might think, the Frost Dragons aren't exactly the strongest creatures on the mountain range, since the Frost Giants naturally resist their strongest ability, their icy breath. So DL can't afford to let the dwarves destroy the city. Instead of giving an answer himself, however, DL turns to his three wives for their consensus. Now, God help me because I'm about to butcher the ever-living hell out of these characters' names. Please forgive me. We have the youngest of the three, Mia Talon Favinus, the dragon that had previously fought DL for territory, Munu Inia Elysium, and the only one who can cast divine magic, Kilistiran Denshushua. Why don't we get their names in the episode? I don't know, maybe the title card guy was out getting coffee or something. Mia believes that he should help since the dwarves aren't much of a threat. Moon agrees with Mia, and Kill is both for and against it due to the unknowns of the situation. Going with the majority though, DL accepts the Quag's request at the cost of 10 times the amount initially presented. The Quag, despite them most likely not having enough, agrees to the payment and leave. DL doesn't plan to take care of the issue himself, however, instead he plans to send one of his children. Kill suggests that they send her oldest child, Hejin Mal. Now, despite Hej probably being the weakest of the kids, even weaker than his younger siblings, he's definitely smarter than them all. DL then decides to fetch him himself because he can't afford to let his wives run wild and destroy his castle. Upon arriving at Heji's room, DL is met with nothing when he knocks on the door, and decides to cut the BS and just break the door down. DL then orders Heji to deal with the dwarves, and he reluctantly agrees. Now, there's a little bit missing here, so let's jump into it. You see, Heji isn't studying battle tactics or magic or anything his father may think of as important. Instead, he's merely studying about the world outside the castle. This leads DL to give Heji one final order. After he's done with the dwarfs, he has 1 month to get the heck out. We then cut to Heji as he worries about his task. Since his physical strength is well below average, Heji is pretty much relying solely on his icy breath. In reality, if he failed or ran, his father would kill him, so he doesn't have much of a choice but to deal with this issue. Hiding his glasses in his scales, which is pretty clever, but I'm not sure how effective that would be in combat, Heji hopes that his enemies will simply run away. Checking out his body, it's less than ideal since he spends all his time in the pursuit of knowledge. Ainz' group then begins to approach from the other end of the tunnel. Though he can't see them at first, thanks to his heightened senses, Heji can tell that there are 4 of them, and that one is much larger than the others. First, he sees Aurora, who in the light novel is at the head of the group, since her ranger skills make her a good guide. Next in the light novel, get used to hearing that, Ainz appears, which frightens Heji, since Elder Liches, which is what he thinks Ainz is, are resistant to cold and can cast fire-based magic. Next, Heji, with his dragon sense for treasure, can tell that Aurora, Ainz, and Shaltir, who appears shortly after, are all wearing high-class gear. This puts Heji on guard, and as the group reaches him, he requests what their business is. Now, Ainz and Heji's first encounter in the light novel is marginally different from the anime, so I'll fill in the gaps. Ainz' first contact is more a combination of confusion and shock. He's confused since there's only one dragon that's come to intersect them, and shocked that said dragon is so weak. In the anime, there is a small back and forth, but in the light novel, Ainz doesn't even give him the time of day and goes straight for the grasp heart. But just as it happens in the anime, Heji throws himself to the ground in hopes of not instantly dying. Luckily, Heji's willingness to submit is stronger than Ainz' thirst for dragon crafting materials. Ainz, after examining Heji, is confused by his body type, but Heji is able to play it off as him just being special, which Ainz buys due to his collector's spirit. Ainz then turns his sights towards the other dragons. Heji explains that there are 19 other dragons, 4 older than him, 6 that are around the same age, and 9 that are younger than him. Ainz then inquires as to what kind of magic the dragons are capable of, the strongest only capable of arcane spells of the 3rd tier. This news disappoints Ainz as he was hoping for a worthwhile fight, since the dragons of Yggdrasil are considered some of the strongest creatures in the game. Ainz then gifts Aurora Heji as a pet. Now, in the anime, Aurora uses a skill to bring Heji into submission, but in the light novel, Aurora uses her killing intent, just like Sebas does in Season 2. Sadly, we have been cruelly denied our chance of seeing Aurora's killing intent. The end result is the same though, with Heji pissing himself out of fear. Thanks to Ainz, or more importantly, Enkoro Mochi Mochi-san, and her dog, Heji is spared immediate disposal. However, this gives Shaltir some less than normal ideas, which Ainz thankfully shoots down. Meanwhile, Heji is cleaning himself on a nearby wall. Ainz then orders Shaltir and Aurora to deal with the Quag, while Ainz and Gondo deal with the dragons. Now, who's ready for some cut content? So before the group splits up, Gondo asks Heji if there are any other dragons beside the aforesaid 19. Heji explains that there might be more around, but they would belong to a different tribe and thus completely out of their control. After hearing this, Gondo recommends that Ainz deal with the present dragons but leave the looming threat, in order to force the dwarves' continued reliance on him. This moment drives home how far Gondo is willing to support Ainz over his own race. Heji, Ainz, and Gondo then proceed to the location of Heji's father. Now, there's a moment here that's changed for literally no reason. In the light novel, Heji is the one who asks Ainz to spare his mother, but for some reason it's changed to Gondo asking instead in the anime. This may be one of the oddest changes in an anime I have ever seen, since it literally didn't need to happen. I feel like they did this to annoy me personally. Following this, Ainz tells Heji to address him as Ainz, or the Sorcerer's King, which Heji views as a test to check if he would pay Ainz the proper respects, and thus addresses Ainz as the Sorcerer's King. The group then enters, and Heji announces the arrival of Ainz ul Gon, the one who will now rule over the dragons. Naturally, DL doesn't take kindly to this, and he grows angrier as Ainz asks if he's willing to submit to him. However, DL calms down long enough to sense Ainz' high quality gear. DL gives Ainz the offer to exchange his clothes for his life, only to be immediately offed by an upset Ainz. After offing Heji's father, Ainz asks which dragon is Heji's mother. However, 3 voices ring out as all 3 dragons claim to be his mother. Luckily for them, Ainz comes to his own conclusion on the matter, and Heji just goes along with it. After this, Ainz orders the 3 dragons to gather all other dragons present here, and to inform them that they are now under new management. He then turns to Heji and orders him to gather all the books present within the castle, and to bring them here as well. With that, we find yet another section with quite a few holes in it, so let's get started. Ainz begins by examining the dragon's hoard, which he lays claim to with Gondo's approval. Gondo in the anime is super ballsy, and while atop of the dragon's corpse, recommends that they open the treasury while no one is around, with Ainz agreeing, comically calling him a bad guy. Gondo suggests that Ainz takes what he wants, as long as it's not a national treasure, since there's no ledger of treasury according to Hege. Of course, they could just say that the dragons took it, but that could lead to the council looking further into matters, so they decide against it. After this, Ainz opens a gate to Nazarick, and orders several 8-edge assassins to collect the books within the castle. He then chucks the dragon's corpse through the portal and has it put on ice for processing later. Ainz and Gondo then approach the treasury, with Ainz pulling out an item called Epigoni. While the item could only be used 7 times, it possesses the lock-picking abilities of a level 90 thief. Now, this is a rare item, and Ainz hates using rare items, but he makes an exception this time since the contents of the treasury interest him so much. With that, the doors open, revealing a glittering hoard within. Now, what follows is something I wanted to see in the anime, but sadly it was cut, so I will discuss it here instead. After entering the treasury, Ainz notices various kinds of gold coins, which would have belonged to different countries back when the dwarfs more openly traded. Upon further inspection, Ainz discovers a very peculiar sword. Now, some of you may remember, but Ainz cannot actively use swords or similar weapons due to his class restrictions. However, the sword Ainz had discovered somehow bypasses this restriction. It personally reminds me of the Levin sword from Fire Emblem, a sword made specifically for mages. The issue with the blade that's also quite surprising is that its power is around level 50, meaning that it isn't strong enough to pierce through Ainz's natural defenses, but it is still far stronger than the majority of weapons in this world. It also was not a product of runecraft, meaning that it may have come from somewhere else. Ainz tosses the blade aside, however, and continues looking, as the blade wasn't quite what Ainz was looking for. What happens next is something I would imagine a lot of light novel readers wanted to see. Ainz, as he's about to give up on finding anything stronger, stumbles upon an item that he finds more interesting than a rule-breaking sword. Now sadly, it's never said what it is that Ainz finds within the light novel, so a lot of us, myself included, were hoping that the anime may give us a clue. Sadly though, that is not the case, and we'll just have to keep on waiting. We then cut to Shaltir and Aurora. Now, the item Aurora activates here is the world-class item known as Depiction of Nature and Society. To put it simply, DNS creates a pocket space that traps anyone within the area of effect. The wielder of DNS is automatically transferred into this pocket space, while all those wielding world-class items besides them are exempt from this effect, unless they choose to enter initially. Which was a change made in Yggdrasil by the devs, possibly because of an incident involving Ainz Gon. Back in my episode 5 review, I mentioned that Ainz was hoping to find prismatic ores within the Dwarven Kingdom. Well, back in Ainz Gon's heyday, they had found a mine which contained said ores, but it was stolen by a rival guild who used a world-class item to keep anyone besides their guild from entering it. It would be a short time later that a patch would roll out to prevent world-class items from affecting other wielders of world-class items, so Ainz Gon may have directly impacted Yggdrasil's design. DNS is more than a simple pocket space, however. The area within could be changed into over 100 different locales. Lava lands, thunderous landscapes, and even battlefields that summon reinforcements are just a few possible choices. The wielder of DNS can also choose who within is affected by the landscapes created. So even if you get stuck in the landscape of lava, Aurora can choose to have it not affect you. Now, there is one major weakness to DNS. Upon activation, one of 40 random escape routes will be created, and while these aren't easy to access, if the enemy were to escape via one of these, they would automatically be given DNS. In this situation though, Aurora chooses a basic enclosed space, and has the Hanzos protect the exit. Now, with that explanation out of the way, we move to Shaltir and Aurora repeating their orders to have the Quag bow, and if they refuse, to cut down their numbers to a measly 10,000 of the 80,000 currently present. Aurora, just like everyone else, is worried about Shaltir going berserk, but Shaltir assures us that she definitely won't mess up. This is where Shaltir recognizes that there isn't anyone all that powerful around. So maybe the Death Knights were destroyed by an item, or just by chance. But maybe, just maybe, Ainz was wrong. Yeah, no. Of course, Ainz knew all along that the Death Knights had fallen into the Great Rift, and merely used this chance to teach Shaltir to keep thinking of all possibilities. Cutting over to the Quag, they're wondering what the sudden change of scenery is about. Also, be aware that at this point, the Quag have seen Ainz's group, so they know who's here and have an idea about their strength. As Shaltir and Aurora appear from the city, Pei knows that Aurora isn't a dwarf, but isn't a golem either. However, he isn't so sure about Shaltir. Pei, as the leader, decides to go and talk. In reality, Pei doesn't mind bending the knee to another master. If they could get rid of the frost dragons, and if that fails, Pei could always offer money for them to change sides. After introducing himself, Pei is surprised to find that Shaltir is not a golem, as she informs him that they are here to subjugate the Quag. Pei, trying to get more information, asks about the whereabouts of the other party members. Shaltir doesn't plan on sharing that info, however, asking once again if the Quag will submit. Now, as I said earlier, Pei is willing to submit, but he can't just give up without a reason. All Pei wants is for Shaltir to explain or show her strength, so that the other Quag will understand and kneel. Unfortunately for Pei, Shaltir views this as defiance, and informs him that they will reduce their numbers, and after that, the Quag are to kill one another till there are only 10,000 left. 4,000 males, 4,000 females, and a measly 2,000 children. In the light novel, Shaltir also asks Pei to not remove his cloak and crown, the symbols of the clan lord, so they don't accidentally kill him by accident. With that, Pei returns to his troops. One thing to mention before we get into what comes next, the cry Pei lets out here is a skill that pretty much turns his men into berserkers that know no fear. That's why they're so willing to fight. Now, the absolute massacre that follows is pretty well done. At least when compared to the Battle of the Katsei Plains in the last season, since they actually remembered to add blood and gore to this scene. The Quag quickly realize that what they're up against is far stronger than the Death Knights that they had previously encountered. Banking on the idea that Shaltir would tire after killing so many, Pei sends out the strongest the Quag have to offer. However, the result remains the same. With nothing left, Pei falls to his knees, sobbing, while in the light novel, the soldiers butcher the children in order to meet the 2,000 child limit set by Shaltir. Moving away from the genocide, Ainz and Gondo have exited the treasury to find the dragons gathered before them. As Ainz laments not getting more corpses, an opportunity presents itself. As one of the dragons speaks out against Ainz offers him to take his best shot. Oh, now he's dead. Not all that surprising. After chucking his newly acquired corpse through the gate to Nazarick, Ainz leads the dragons out to where Shaltir and Aurora are waiting. Ainz then goes and addresses a terrified Pei, offering prosperity for his people if they work hard for him, which Pei obviously accepts. Ainz then turns to Shaltir and Aurora, congratulating them on a job well done. This praise finally lifts the shame that's plagued Shaltir since the end of Season 1. Ainz then asks if the Quag forces possessed any strong individuals, and this is where Ainz finally realizes what actually happened to his Death Knights. Though Ainz initially thinks that this was a horrible mistake, he realizes that this is his chance to tell the Guardians that he isn't an all-knowing deity as they seem to believe. And though he tries to say this at first, Shaltir and Aurora have already come to their own conclusions on the matter, and it only seems to make things worse. As Shaltir cries tears of joy over finally having been of use to Ainz, we fade to black. Now, there's a section cut here that's connected to a cut plot point I mentioned in my episode 6 review. That being the Forge Master taking the ingot Ainz gave them and leaving. In all honesty, Ainz doesn't care much about the ingot, since it's so weak, and in the end, the council members offer him 3 sets of adamantine armor, so Ainz is pretty happy with the end result. This also allows Ainz to request a farewell party for the Runesmiths, which at the same time allows Ainz an excuse to not return to Erentel. He also wanted more time to research the existence of players from the past, learn more about the history of runes and where they came from, and finally, Ainz still wanted to see if prismatic ores existed within the Dwarven Kingdom, or if they did at one point, so he needed to look into that as well. Finally, we reached the final section of this episode. Thanks to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, a variety of food and alcohol had been brought to feast upon. The spirits of the Runesmiths have also arisen as well, since the party indicates that they're not being sold to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, but instead being hired. Ainz then excuses himself and enters a separate room where Demiurge is waiting. We then get another statement that says theocracy instead of Holy Kingdom because of reasons. See my episode 5 review to hear me explain that. Demiurge, in awe of Ainz's wisdom, inquires as to how long Ainz has planned into the future. This leads Ainz to reminisce about a guild once called Millennium Kingdom, and the words 10,000 years slip from his mouth. Of course, Ainz isn't being serious, but Demiurge sure takes it seriously. Sadly, Demiurge's understanding of the matter has only made things worse for Ainz. Now, there is some extra text here as well as an epilogue. Both are skipped over due to their relevance to volumes 12 and 13, which will not be covered in this season, so I think it's just best to leave it at that for now. So, I've seen people saying that this is the most butchered episode so far when it comes to being a faithful adaptation of the light novel. While I can't say that they're wrong, I personally believe that it was the overall handling of Volume 11, not just the single episode that was the issue. Madhouse trying to cram 318 pages of a book into 3 episodes without having to butcher the ever-living hell out of it is absolute insanity. Due to this, I feel like a lot of characters introduced here feel flat, since a lot of them had no time to actually show off their characteristics. We can only hope that given 6 episodes, Madhouse can better explore Volume 14, because so far, Overlord Season 4 has been very underwhelming, at least from a light novel reader's perspective. But what did you all think? Let me know down in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and are looking forward to more in the future. And as always, this has been the Professor Z, and I will see you all next time.